welcome to episode 33 of Universal Adapter. This is the show where two Brits, one who stayed put,
that's me,
and one who got out, that's me, discuss the relative merits of our current home countries. Each week we'll pick a new topic and discuss who has it better. So this week, I feel like we should start with this. Matt is currently staying put in a bit of a unique situation. Where are you, Matt?
I'm in a shed in Devon. Hello. I've been living up to my role on this show as the representative of the United Kingdom, because within the last 3-4 days, I have travelled from Edinburgh to Birmingham to Bristol and finally to Devon. So I have literally travelled the length of the country to be with you today.
And now you're in a shed. I love it. It's fantastic.
And now I'm in a shed, yes.
Let's just say he is in the shed by choice. This isn't a hostage situation that I'm making fun of.
Exactly, yeah. I'm just perched on top of the washing machine. Got a couple of some nets and a broom. And these are things that I can see. That's it for this episode of Shed Talk.
All of that is wholly irrelevant to this episode, where I guess the broad category of what we're discussing would be police departments, civil protection.
My description of this was guards dressed in red.
Oh, I like it.
People whose job it is to protect something or someone, be that a country or a sovereign, who wear lovely red jackets with big shiny buttons.
Excellent. I didn't realise fashion had played such a big part in your selection process.
I mean, I think that must have been, at least subliminally, that must have been part of it. why we decided to conflate these two. But Sarah, so what in particular have you picked?
The only police force that anyone knows about in Canada. Very strangely named, because they're not all on horseback, but they are still called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, aka the Mounties.
Wonderful. And from my end, you're going to be hearing about a particular part of the Queen's Guard, which is the Footguard, which is basically them people wear the big red jackets and the big old bearskin hats, and they wander around outside of Buckingham Palace and a couple of other places, basically, to make sure that the royal residences are being well looked after, and particularly that Her Madge is safe.
Excellent. So mine are doing an entire country and yours are doing one person, but I'd like it. Well, luckily, what they're protecting actually isn't one of the things we discuss in our comparison. So, honestly, they could be protecting a toadstool if they were dressed in red. Counts?
Yeah, that's not one of our metrics for success for this week. Speaking of which, shall we move on to the first round?
Indeed. So, in discussions, I called this a costume. Uniform is probably the correct term.
We can go with costume.
You can tell we did a lot of drama at university. So, Matthew, tell me about the attire that your guards are showing off, strutting on the catwalk.
Well, here comes one of the Queen's Footguard coming down the catwalk now. You'll see that they are sporting some patent leather boots. They're wearing some lovely dark trousers with a red stripe up the leg, just for, I think that's like a go faster stripe. Big white belt, and then the aforementioned red tunic, and then we go all the way to the top and we find the most iconic piece of clothing in the bearskin hat, made from an actual bear. An entire bear.
So really, even these days, they use real fur?
Yeah, so the army have been looking for a long old time for some sort of synthetic replacement for the bearskin, but they haven't been able to find one because of the way that the bearskin works. It stays put in wind, in rain, in cold, sort of whatever the weather, it still looks good. It's sort of naturally waterproofed in a way that when they've tried to use synthetic replacements, it ends up just looking a little bit bedraggled. Really, this is the British Army saying, well, we've got to kill the bears for fashion. So depending on where your priorities lie, depending on what you think of the British Army, that may or may not seem like a compelling argument. The other sort of addendum to that, though, is that the bears are sourced from Canada. So they're all Canadian black bears. 100 new hats need to be made each year. A single hat requires an entire bear skin to create, but those bears that they use to make the hats are culled from the population in Canada by local hunters, indigenous hunters as well, I believe, to stop the black bear population becoming too big.
Oh, so it is actually just a form of population control that happens to then become a fashion piece.
Yes, exactly. And if you look at the way that they wear them as well, they wear the chin strap just above their chin, sort of between their chin and the bottom of their mouth. And they do that apparently because they used to be worn by grenadier guards, I think up until the Crimean War. So while they were wearing them on active combat duty, if they were shot in the hat, and you're to blame, Dolly, you give love a bad name, then and the strap was around their chin, then there's a chance that if the hat was shot off of their head, it was so bulky that it would pull their head all the way back and essentially snap their neck.
Oh.
Even though it looks silly, that's why they wear the chin strap around that part of their face. You'll also notice as well, different guards will have slightly different uniforms. There are 5 different regiments that the guards are pulled from. There are the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, and then the Irish, Scots and Welsh Guards. They've all got, well, everyone but the Irish regiment have little plumes in their hats, and they're all different colours depending on the regiment that they've been pulled from. And I also believe the elemental type of the moves that they can use as well.
Oh, so like a little ID card in your hat form.
Yes, and they've also got a little pin as well, which shows you. So, for example, the Grenadier Guards have a little grenade. So, if you look closely, you can tell who's who. Do a little bit of bird spotting.
Just like twitching on the lawns of Buckingham Palace.
Exactly. And one other thing as well, they will usually have, to complete their ensemble, what is an outfit without accessories, they will usually have a rifle as well, although the gun is usually not loaded unless they know or they have an inkling things are going to go down.
Oh my gosh, I've never actually, even though I have been to Buckingham Palace several times, not actually been inside, but around the outside, several times, I sort of never clocked on to the fact that they're holding guns. Because you're always like, oh yeah, our police force don't carry guns. They're literally in front of the Queen's house.
Sarah, would you like to tell me about the Mountie outfit?
I would, yes. So I'm sure everyone's seen like a stereotypical Mountie, I imagine. It's quite a common Canadian symbol. Starts off very similar. Black boots, stylish, great with every outfit. Then they also went for the black with a striped trouser, but they've got a yellow stripe down the outside. Then you get the beautiful red coat, and you get a big hat. Not all of it, not quite as tall as the ones you were discussing, but it is wide. And it's actually called a campaign hat, because it's used in basically a lot of military campaigns, because it keeps the sun off you, because it's based off a sombrero. So it stops people getting sunburnt, so they're all about the health and safety first in the campaign hat.
That's fair enough.
And it's now only used as a dress hat because it's made of felt, so protection is limited. So this is the dress costume that I have looked into, because you see the mounted police everywhere because they are just the police, but they're just not always on horses. So 90% of the time they just look like a normal police personnel going around town, but that's not overly exciting. So instead, on special occasions, they have their red coat. It came into use in 1876, so they've had it a while now. And it was designed to look quite military-esque, despite the fact that they're not actually a military unit. But my favourite thing about this is that this look was also adopted by Jacques Rogiu. Jacques Rogiu. And have you ever heard of him before?
Not or at all, I don't think. Who are they?
Well, this is not somewhere I expected to find myself, but he is a WWF wrestler from Quebec.
Oh, wow.
And originally he was in a bit of a double act with his brother until 1990 when his brother retired. And he was like, well, I need a new character. And when he was younger, as the story goes, he apparently went through the basic Mountie training. So he created himself a WWF character called the Mountie. And he was a corrupt cattle prod wielding member of the Canadian Mounted Police who boasted that he always got his man. I don't know how nice this one would have been, because his post-match gimmick was that he would shock him in the tummy.
Oh no! Yeah, he didn't sound very nice.
Probably not a nice one. And yeah, also the Mounties also thought he didn't sound very nice, and he actually got banned from using this particular character. And was told he wasn't allowed to perform as the Mountie in Canada because it wasn't a true representative of the Mounties.
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah, you can see why they probably weren't too happy with it.
So now we need to discuss who does it better. And I feel like it really comes down to the hats.
Yeah, sadly I think it does, because I feel like until the neck, very similar sort of attire.
When we get to the hats, what do we think?
I do think the British hats have kind of got it. They're very iconic, and they just look downright ridiculous. And I just thoroughly enjoy them every time, because they're the people, they can't smile while they're wearing that. I mean, it takes a lot of self-control to be wearing a ridiculous hat and not take some enjoyment in this situation. So I do think it's, in a way, hats off to them.
Okay, I would take that. I would take the bearskin over the little felt number that the Mounties wear. Gotta say, if I had to pick one to wear recreationally, it wouldn't be a bearskin.
Oh yeah, if I was going to be a WWF wrestler, would not be wearing the bearskin hat. Although maybe that needs doing.
Yeah, no, you could hide a chair up there or some other such. Although apparently you can just wander into the ring with a cattle prod, so maybe you don't need to hide it too much. Okay then, that takes us on to round 2. So Sarah, what have we got for our second round?
So round 2, we are discussing infamous criminals that our retrospective teams of badass protectors have encountered since their formation. So along the ways. So I have brought with me, metaphorically, because I don't think I'd want him in my house, William, or Billy, Minor, who was known as the Gentleman Robber.
Okay, good start.
So because he was, despite the fact he was a robber, he was renowned for being exceedingly polite while he was committing these robberies. He has quite an interesting life up to and after this event. So he had been committing train robberies for quite a while, all over the American West, and had actually been imprisoned there. And when he got out, he was like, well, I'm going to move up to Canada, start afresh. They don't know who I am. We'll give it all another go. And in 1904, he actually staged the very first train robbery in Canada, just in a place called Mission, which is outside of Vancouver. We all have to have a claim to fame, and that's his. And what they used to do, and I was like, how do you rob a train? Not a clue. And what they actually did is, like, the express cars, which I gather carry small amounts of freight. So if you haven't got enough freight to buy a full car, you get you just like buy a bit of an express car and load your stuff into that. And then so it would go engine, express car, baggage car, passengers. So what they would do is they would hop onto the train when it was like going slowly, and then they would force the engineer at gunpoint, albeit apparently politely, to stop the train. They would then unhook the baggage and the express cars from the train and forced the engineer to take the train a few more miles down the track, at which point they could unload it. And this is how he carried on his successful train robbery in 1904, and he got away with it. He wasn't seen again for another 2 years until 1906, when he tried to do it again near Kamloops, which is about 4 hours further inland than Vancouver.
Okay.
And a few years before, when he'd been in Oregon trying to rob a train, he made a mistake and he was using dynamite to break into the express cars, because that's where the really valuable stuff is, like gold. By accident, he ended up blowing up the entire baggage car. He escaped with $15 in cash and a handful of liver pills. So he didn't get an awful lot. And when he was in Kamloops, he managed to do this again. How you get the wrong carriage twice, I don't know. You think you would have learned that. And this is when the Mounties came gallivanting in, and they finally caught him and they imprisoned him. They sentenced him for 25 years.
That's fair enough. I mean, he at the very least sounds like he didn't know his way around a stick of dynamite, and probably. But it seems like he was just bad at his job anyway.
And there is a pub named after him in a town called Maple Ridge, which is just outside of Vancouver. And my friend has been there, and he described it as all right. So that's a selling point.
Good. Just another service that we provide.
If you want a distinctly average time, would recommend.
All right. Would you like to hear about my guy?
I would love to, because I imagine they've had some interesting attempts on their place of work.
So, my criminal of choice is Michael Fagan? F-A-G-A-N. Like Fagin, but not quite. So, he made an attempt upon the Palace of Buckingham. So he managed to make it in once in June 1982. He clambered over the gates, went into Buckingham Palace, startled a maid who called the guards.
Oh.
But because he wasn't there when the guards came, the guards just assumed that this maid had been making it up.
Oh.
He ate some cheese and crackers while he was there, drank half a bottle of wine, wandered into the toilet, and apparently found some presents which Princess Diana had bought for baby William, who was a month old.
Oh.
So yeah, kind of creepy.
Really creepy. So he didn't take anything? He just was like a really creepy Santa?
Yeah, he just sort of had a bit of a look around, and I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, not like, would you, but I mean,
If I happened to find myself unattended in Buckingham Palace, would have a snoop.
Exactly.
But I'm not quite sure how that situation has arisen.
And then he got bored and left. But then the big one happened at 7 a.m. July 1982. The 9th at 7 a.m. he arrived at Buckingham Palace. He scaled the 14-foot high perimeter wall, topped with revolving spikes and barbed wire, and then he got to the palace itself, clambered up a drain pipe, and just went for a wander. He did manage to trip a motion sensing alarm, but the security who were watching, sat in the control room, they saw it flash up, but they assumed that it was faulty. So they just silenced it. They assumed that it was a false positive.
Oh, good to know. They're really on it.
He gets to the Queen's bedroom at 7:15, and she's still in bed.
Oh my god.
And he wanders in, has a sit down on the end of the Queen's bed. She calls for the guards, and nobody comes initially until it's her duty footman, who's been out walking her dogs in the morning. He comes along and brings along 2 police with him. And they, at the time, couldn't sentence him for trespassing on Buckingham Palace, because apparently at that point it was considered a civil crime rather than a criminal crime.
Oh my god.
I'm not sure what the difference is, but the only thing that they could properly nail him on was the fact that he'd stolen this wine and cheese.
So not the fact that he had literally strutted up to Liz and just sat on the end of her bed.
Yeah, that was his claim to fame, his big moment. So he wasn't able to be arrested. He spent some time in a psychiatric hospital at the sort of insistence of the police.
Fascinating. I'm just more let down by the guards who just were like, oh, probably just a false positive. And then even when the Queen herself raises the alarm, they just moseyed when they had time. They're like, oh, we'll get around to it. She'll be fine.
So the thing is that the guards are responsible. Yes, they're responsible for the perimeter, but everything sort of within the walls of the palace, the Footguard are kind of mainly there in for ceremonial duties. The police really are in charge of dealing with the stuff that happens inside of the palace and kind of any actual criminal activity. So while the perimeter guard did drop the ball, they weren't the only ones who did in this series of unfortunate events.
That's the one where everyone should be disappointed in themselves.
And I think they were. So there you go. So that's Michael Fagan, compared to what was your guy's name?
Billy Miner.
Billy Miner. I mean, Billy Miner, there's a certain sense of daring do, of...
Yeah, he was a criminal done right.
Yes.
He had high ambitions and he sort of achieved them.
Yeah, I think that there's something, I guess, sort of romantic about the things that he did. Not romantic, not in a Valentine's card sense, but in a, I don't know, Errol Flynn swinging off a chandelier sort of sense. But he was very dangerous with that dynamite. It's like, oh, I accidentally blocked the baggage car. What if he'd gone one more over?
But he was so polite. People always talked about how polite he was.
At gunpoint.
And there is nothing more Canadian than that.
Yeah. I guess that is the kind of the blending of the US and Canada, isn't it? He's got a gun, but he did say sorry. I think that your guy should win this round.
Go Billy. If I'm ever in Maple Ridge, I will go to the Billy Miner pub and have my photo taken outside of it.
Please do. Cool. Do you want to take us to the ad break?
Oh, yes. So, if you are enjoying this and would like to download it for your own personal use to store, make a shrine to us, not in a creepy way, just in a complimentary way, then you can do by going to Apple Podcasts. You can also leave reviews and you can rate us 5 stars, or however many stars you think is appropriate, as long as it's 5. And it helps other people find the podcast, so we would be eternally grateful for that. You can also like us on Facebook. We are Universal Adapter Podcast. We also use that name on Instagram and YouTube. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We are at UniAdapter.
And you can also send us an email with show suggestions, feedback, questions, comments to universaladapterpodcast@gmail.com.
Beautiful.
Okay, and now we will continue with round 3.
Round 3. So we had a bit of a sad time with our creepy stalker at Buckingham Palace. So let's lighten the mood with some funny news stories.
Yes. So round 3, funny news stories. Shall I jump in first?
Jump right in.
Okay then. So my funny news story, funny is in the eye of the beholder, but it's a viral video that has become popular very recently, and you may have seen it. If not, then I'll put a link to it somewhere. One of the guards doing their patrol, there's a rope between him and his station and the crowd. Someone has gone under or over the rope and is standing directly in his path, trying to get somebody else to take a picture of them so that they've got the guard in the background. And the guard is marching up. I don't know if it's entirely clear whether he shouts a warning beforehand. One arm comes up, he pushes this tourist clear out of the way and just carries on marching. And from the looks of things, it's pretty uncompromising.
Yeah.
He's going sort of full speed, proper marchy, as is the technical term. Arm comes up, swings out, proper shove. She stumbles forward about 5 or 6 paces, and he just carries on going, does not break stride. His face doesn't change at all. That is, depending on how you feel about Schadenfreude, perhaps it is funny.
Seeing as I have been a tour guide, I have very little sympathy for people who break the rules and go over the barriers when they shouldn't.
I was going to mention this earlier, but there are 3 different ways. So there are 3 different ways in increasing severity that a guard can warn you, basically, that they've had enough. Because obviously they're not meant to talk or interact. So basically, you've got step 1 is stamp your feet and shout. Step 2 is stamp your feet and shout again. Step 3, if the nuisance persists, is get your gun and point it at the person who is causing the nuisance until they stop.
Oh my god, that's brilliant.
So there is a procedure, but it ramps up very quickly.
I mean, that's quite a jump from step 2 to step 3, but desperate times call for desperate measures, apparently.
Exactly. So there we are. That's my new story about the Queen's Footguard. Do you have a similar or a funnier story?
It's definitely not similar. I've taken a very different vein with my one.
Okay.
So this was on September 2015. Where a goat called Goliath,
Nice.
he's from Alberta, but had been taken to Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, so the next province over, to be part of a rodeo competition. Now, all had gone well. It was just a normal night for Goliath and the other goats chilling. And then, Saturday night, he goes missing. And no one knows where he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was found 20 kilometres away in a Tim Hortons coffee shop. For anyone who doesn't know Tim Hortons, it's basically the most Canadian coffee shop in existence. He was taken 20 kilometres away. No one's really sure why. Employees reported that they tried to ask the goat to leave, and it refused. So that's when they called in the police, and the Mounties described the goat as loitering, and then arrested him and took him to an animal hospital. But in a later statement, they admitted the goat probably was just cold and was not actively trying to cause a disturbance. The goat thankfully was then returned back to his owners, so all was well.
Oh.
Well, I looked into it. I was like, so rodeos isn't normally goats, so I had a little Google as to what they're doing.
Goat
and it's for,
rodeo.
Like, kids rodeo.
Oh.
So you send the goat and some 7-year-olds into the ring, and they have to. One has to lasso it around its neck, I think the video did, and then the other one has to get it around its feet, and they bring it down.
Oh, poor little goat. No wonder he wanted to go and grab a coffee. Okay, that's excellent.
I think in terms of global reach and sheer,
It's a very hot fuzz moment.
yeah, it is very hot fuzz. You are correct. But I really liked your one because it's so much like these are supposed to be prim and proper people, and then they get caught in the act.
But you did say funny. And I think that there's something more charming and innocently humorous about the image of a bunch of Mounties chasing down a goat.
I just like the idea of them just like asking him to leave. That's the bit that I really enjoy.
It's that image of
Excuse me.
a Mountie and Tim Hortons with like a notepad and pen out, just like trying to take down this goat's details. Excuse me, can you take this breathalyzer test, please, Mr. Goat? The goat's like, oh, sorry to butt in. Got 3 kids at home.
Just wanted a donut.
So yeah, I'm all for the story of the other story of Goliath, the less told one, which means that me with my, there was round 1 where we talked about all the bears that got killed. There was round 2 where there was the man stalking the queen, and there was round 3 where a hapless tourist got smacked by a guard. I think that it's fair enough that you take home the win for this week.
Yay! I mean, just like a barrel of laughs being at Buckingham Palace.
Anyway.
Well, amazing. Another win for the good old, the Great White North.
Yeah.
Canada. Thank you very much for joining us. For Matt for hiding in the shed so we had a nice quiet space to record this episode.
All right then. We'll speak to you all in 2 weeks' time.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye bye.